Good evening. Hi there, I am Mike Rabel, and today we are going to be discussing Article 2, that is, the executive branch. We talked in separation of powers about how the various branches of government are given distinct powers and how the executive branch is supposed to carry out the law, right, rather than make it. But if you look constitutionally, there are other powers that are granted, specifically enumerated powers that are granted to the president. For instance, he is the, of course, chief administrator. He is the one that is to faithfully execute, take care that the laws be faithfully executed. So that's sort of the executive part of it, to carry out the laws that Congress has passed. In some ways, he is supposed to be a legislator. He is not allowed, of course, to propose legislation. There is a provision of the Constitution, however, that says from time to time he shall make an address to the Congress regarding the State of the Union and give them information regarding legislation that he deems would be in the nation's best interest. So the president can use his position as the bully pulpit, that is to get free television time, to get access to break into your favorite TV show so you can't watch American Idol or whatever, because he wants to talk to you and take his message directly to the people, hoping that he can influence the Congress in that way to pass legislation that he deems expedient. The president is also the chief diplomat. We haven't really seen a very strong use of this since Herbert Walker Bush, Bush 41 as some people call him. He was a coalition builder, the one that led us into Desert Storm. He was apparently he had previously been in the Central Intelligence Agency, and apparently he had personal relationships with a lot of national leaders. And using that as a springboard, he was able to pick up the phone and say, guys, we've got a problem. Here's what I would like to do. So the president is the chief diplomat. He has the authority, the exclusive authority to negotiate treaties. Now, these treaties have to be ratified by the Senate, but when it comes to international relations, when the president goes to visit, it's a big deal, and he is the one that sits down, and you can hearken all the way back to when Nixon opened diplomatic relations with China in 1972. Back then during, I think at that time they were called the SALT, Strategic Arm Limitation Treaty. Reagan actually was involved in some strategic arm limitation treaties as well, and I don't recall, I think it was called START, and it was like Strategic and Tactical Nuclear Weapons Reduction Act or something. But at any rate, they are the ones that are empowered to negotiate the treaties. As I said, the treaties have to be confirmed by the Senate or they are not effective as a matter of law, and the United States is not bound by them. He's also commander-in-chief, and this is where things have gotten a little strange. That's why when he's on board an Air Force aircraft, it's called Air Force One, because he's the commander-in-chief. When he's on board a helicopter that's flown by the Marines, it's Marine One. I guess when he's in a limousine owned by the Army, it's called Army One. Doesn't matter. He is commander-in-chief. He ultimately has the final say-so on military action that is going to be carried out by the United States. That has theoretically been limited by the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act was passed by Congress in the wake of the Vietnam conflict and the wake of Watergate. It was during the end of Richard Nixon's presidency. The War Powers Act essentially says anytime the president is going to send troops into harm's way, he's got to report to us, Congress, and let us know, so that we can decide whether or not we should pass a resolution allowing him to continue to have those troops in harm's way, or whether we wish to recall them. That's a restriction on his power of commander-in-chief. It's never been tested for constitutionality, so it's kind of unclear whether or not it would be enforceable. At the time it was passed, I believe Nixon vetoed it, and they overrode his veto, which means 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate said, we want this to happen. So that is one of the limitations. As we know, Congress is the only branch of the government that has the authority to declare war, but it's done so only 5 times. I'm going to go from most recent to least recent, which is World War II, World War I, Spanish-American War, Mexican-American War, and the War of 1812. All the other skirmishes that we've had, all the other battles, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, those were not declared war. Congress never passed them. It was somewhat like the situation we had in Iraq, where Congress authorized the president to take action and continued to fund those actions, and then as the constitutional commander-in-chief, the president was able to execute those actions using the military. Okay? So not necessarily, just because it's called a war, doesn't mean that Congress has declared war. Congress has only declared war 5 times in the nation's history. Now, if Congress, for whatever reason, thinks that the president is guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors, and that's a term that's never defined in the Constitution, but if they believe that he is, they have the power of impeachment. The power of impeachment is a 2-step process, but it involves all of Article 1, because initially what must happen is 2/3 of the members of the House of Representatives have to vote for articles of impeachment. These are essentially like criminal indictments, if you will. These are documents that say, we think the president broke the law because, and then set out how and why and when they believe the infraction occurred, that it's sufficient to put the president on trial. If the House passes the articles of impeachment, then it proceeds to a trial in the Senate. And at that point, 2/3 of the Senate must vote that, yes, indeed, the president violated the law or committed a high crime or misdemeanor in accordance with what the House said. If they fail to get 2/3 vote, the president is not impeached. He goes on his merry way and continues to govern the executive branch. Presiding over the trial in the Senate is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So you get a little bit of Article 3 thrown in there too. I think that was done for good measure and to make them feel included, and it's probably a pretty good idea. Although a lot of people think that Richard Nixon was impeached, he never was. There was a committee investigating him that voted to approve articles of impeachment and send it to the full House. But before it was sent to the full House, Nixon resigned in August of 1974. So Richard Nixon was not impeached. Don't get confused with that. To date, there have only been 2 presidents that have ever been impeached, and I mean that in the terms of having articles of impeachment brought against them. The first was Andrew Johnson in the era right after the Civil War, era known as Reconstruction. And at that time, there was something called the Tenure of Office Act, which basically meant he wasn't allowed to fire anybody. And the president took the position, Andrew Johnson took the position, that if I have the power to appoint them, and all I have to do is get Senate confirmation to appoint them, well, I ought to have the power to fire them and appoint somebody else. So Congress passed the Tenure of Office Act that says no, since you have to suggest the person and the Senate has to confirm them, you can only fire somebody with Senate confirmation. Complicated constitutional issue, but the bottom line is Johnson was impeached and he misses, articles of impeachment were passed against him, he misses actually being thrown out of office and impeached by 1 vote. Fast forward over 130 years and you wind up with William Jefferson Clinton, Bill Clinton, who, as a result of an investigation into what was called Whitewater, which was a hokey financial dealings that he had, they came across the infamous Monica Lewinsky, who was a White House aide who apparently wore a thong and engaged in all sorts of inappropriate behavior for the White House. And so the president the articles of impeachment were passed by the House of Representatives, but the American people, for whatever reason, did not feel that the acts that the president had committed were sufficient to throw him out of office. And that's the only reason I can think of that the Senate didn't actually impeach the president. So we've had 2 presidents that have been impeached, Andrew Johnson who had articles brought against him but was not removed from office, and Bill Clinton, who had articles brought against him but was not removed from office. So that's a brief overview of Article 2 dealing with the executive.